The biker's roar ripped through the cafe, shattering the soft hum of the morning. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze in midair. Christina barely had time to part her lips before the cup came flying. It spun once, ceramic catching a glint of the sunrise, before crashing into her chest. Scalding coffee exploded across her shirt as the heat bit through her uniform in seconds, and a sharp hiss escaped her lips as she staggered back, gripping the counter for balance. The burn was bad. Laughter erupted from the other side of the room. "Oh, damn. Look at her." One of the bikers hooted, slapping his knee. It didn't even flinch. Maybe she likes it rough. Christina's breath came in ragged bursts. The pain gnawed at her chest, but something else burned hotter. Anger. She ripped the soaked apron off. The fabric slapped against the floor. Her hand curled around the empty cup, still warm, and without a second's hesitation, she hurled it right back. The ceramic smashed into the bearded biker's chest. Coffee and ceramic shards flew as a wet stain spread across his grimy leather vest. His smirk vanished. The cafe fell silent. The old man in the corner booth lowered his newspaper. A young couple by the window exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even the coffee machine's hum seemed to fade, like the whole place was holding its breath. The biker looked down at his vest, watching the stain spread. Slowly, he looked back up at Christina. "Oh, you got some balls, huh?" His voice dropped an octave, slow and thick with menace. He stepped forward, then another step. "You think you can talk back to me?" His hand slipped into his vest. Click. The metallic snap of a blade echoed through the hush of the cafe. He pulled out a folding knife, flicking it open with a practiced twitch. His two friends grinned, shifting their weight like wolves about to pounce. Christina's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. Burned skin throbbed. Her fists clenched, but she stood her ground. Then the biker lunged. Christina gasped, her breath hitching, fear freezing her chest like ice. Her body reacted before her mind could. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the worst. The cafe exploded into panic. Into panic. Chairs scraped across the floor as customers dove for cover. A woman screamed near the window. The old man by the counter muttered a curse under his breath. But the strike never landed. Instead, a loud, meaty thud cut through the chaos. Christina's eyes snapped open. The biker's wrist was frozen in midair, locked in an iron grip. A hand, steady, unmoving, had caught him mid-strike. Thick fingers wrapped around his forearm, stopping the blade mere inches from her chest. The knife trembled. Useless. The biker's eyes widened in disbelief. He yanked his arm, trying to pull away, but it didn't budge. The grip didn't loosen, didn't even shift. The man who had stopped him stood calm, unshaken. He wasn't young, but he sure as hell wasn't weak. His grizzled features looked carved from stone, weathered by years of hard miles. A cowboy hat sat low over his brow, shadowing the hard-set line of his jaw. A denim jacket stretched across broad shoulders, and the way he stood, feet planted, immovable. He might as well have been a damn redwood. The biker snarled, yanking again. "Nothing." "What the hell?" Before he could finish, the man released him, not gently. He shoved the biker's arm back with a force that sent him stumbling. The knife nearly slipped from his fingers. The biker staggered, eyes flickering between fear and confusion. Anger returned, bubbling fast beneath his embarrassment. His face twisted. He spat on the floor. His two buddies straightened, cracking their knuckles. Predators recalculating the odds. The bearded biker wiped at his vest and growled, voice thick with defiance. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The man didn't blink, didn't flinch. He let the silence hang like a challenge. Then, in a steady voice that cut through the tension like a blade, he said, "Chuck Norris." A beat passed. Then the bikers burst into laughter. And no, the bearded one wheezed. "You hear that, boys? We got a goddamn legend in our midst." The second biker, a wiry guy with too many rings and too few teeth, wiped a tear from his eye. "Oh, what's next? Clint Eastwood gonna walk in and back you up?" The third, the biggest of them all, just cracked his neck. Their leader grinned, still gripping the knife tighter now. "Hey." "Well then, Chuck," he spat, stepping forward. "Let's see if you live up to the damn name." A few hours earlier, before the shouting, before the broken cup, before the scalding coffee and the flash of a blade, everything had been quiet. The sun was just starting to rise when Chuck Norris stepped through the door of Mary's diner. a little cafe tucked on the edge of a nowhere town. It wasn't fancy, just mismatched chairs, checkered floors, and a counter worn down by years of elbows and spilled stories. But it had good coffee. Chuck liked places that felt real. For 3 months now, while filming in a dusty town no one had heard of, Chuck had made Mary's his morning ritual. Same order every day, black coffee. No sugar, no cream, window seat. At first, people stared. Of course they did. It was Chuck Norris. But the thing about small towns is they get used to anything. A few weeks in, the whispers stopped. The pointing faded. He wasn't a legend here. He was just Chuck. The quiet guy who liked his coffee hot and his mornings quiet. Even the staff had warmed to him. "Hey, morning, Chuck," Christina called from behind the counter, her smile bright as always. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but tough. The kind of tough that grows in people who've had to be. Christina was in her 20s, quick on her feet, and sharper than most, gave her credit for. She had a knack for remembering orders and an even sharper sense for reading people. She never fawned over Chuck like some of the younger customers did. Never asked for a picture. Never brought up old movies or tired jokes. To her, he was just another regular. Chuck liked that. He tipped his hat in her direction. A morning, she was already pouring his coffee before he even reached the counter. She knew how he liked it. Black, no sugar, strong enough to wake the dead. "We're early today," she said, sliding the steaming cup toward him. Chuck nodded in thanks, taking the cup in his calloused hand. "I figured I'd get in before the rush." Christina smirked. "A rush? Chuck, this is the slowest place in town." He gave a small chuckle and carried his coffee to his usual table by the window. The diner had its regulars. Old Jim sat in his corner, thumbing through a newspaper with fingers twisted by age and winters long gone. Earl and Marcy, married longer than some buildings had stood, whispered to each other over pancakes. A pair of truckers near the door were going over a route that would take them through Texas. It was simple, quiet. The air smelled of bacon, fresh coffee, and floor polish. The radio hummed a low country tune. Outside, a few cars kicked up dust as they passed along the sun-baked road. Chuck leaned back in his chair and let the moment settle over him. Peaceful. In the way only small-town mornings could be. Then the door slammed open. The bell above it clanged so violently it sounded like a gunshot. A gust of morning air swept through the cafe, carrying with it the stench of leather, sweat, and stale cigarettes. 3 men walked in, loud, like they owned the place. The first, clearly the leader, was broad-shouldered, with a wild, unkempt beard and a leather jacket patched with faded club insignias. His face looked like it had been carved with a crowbar, every line a bad story. The second was wiry, twitchy, his fingers heavy with rings. His eyes flicked around the cafe like a rat sniffing for scrap. The third, the biggest, looked like he'd been built in a garage, brick by brick. His knuckles were scarred and swollen, the kind of hands made to break things, people, furniture. The room felt smaller the moment they walked in. The air grew heavier. Chuck didn't move, didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. He'd been in places like this, seen men like them. He already knew what was coming. Christina's smile faltered, just a hair, as she pulled the coffee pot from the burner. "A morning, fellas," she said, keeping her tone neutral. The bearded one stepped up to the counter, planting both hands firmly on it. His knuckles were raw, a fresh scab just beginning to heal. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "A morning, sweetheart," he drawled. Christina's grip tightened on the coffee pot. Chuck watched, not directly, but through the window's reflection. The room had gone still. Even old Jim had lowered his paper. The wiry one slumped into a chair at a nearby table like he belonged there. The big guy cracked his knuckles, slow, and loud. Chuck sipped his coffee. Still hot, still calm, still calm, still calm. But peace didn't last long when men like that walked in. The bearded biker scanned the room, eyes flicking over the faces like a man browsing a menu. Then he zeroed in on Christina. His lips stretched into a slow, greasy smirk, the kind that made your skin crawl just by proximity. His fingers tapped the counter like he had all the time in the world. Well, he said, voice thick with amusement. "Ain't you just the prettiest thing I've seen in a while?" Christina had been wiping down the counter. Her hands stilled. Her jaw clenched just for a second before she forced a breath and kept her cool. This wasn't the first time she'd dealt with scum like this. Wouldn't be the last. She set the rag down, ignoring the way he leaned in just a bit too close. "You boys ordering something, or just standing around wasting air?" The biker's grin widened. He lifted a hand, brushing his fingertips along the strap of her apron. "St," he murmured. "Maybe I just like the service here." Christina's hand shot up, smacking his away. "Quick, sharp, controlled. Not afraid, just done." A man froze. The grin held, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something colder. The wiry one chuckled from his seat. "A feisty," he muttered. "I like it." But the bearded one didn't laugh. His eyes stayed locked on Christina. Then, like nothing had happened, he straightened up, rolled his shoulders, and reached for her again. This time his hand landed on her hip. The reaction was immediate. Christina jerked back so fast, her heel nearly slipped on the tile. Her hand snapped up and grabbed his wrist, shoving it off with more force than expected. I said, "Keep your damn hands off me." His buddies laughed louder now. The big one leaned against a nearby table, grinning like he was watching the prelude to a fight. The bearded man's face twitched. Not much. But Christina saw it. He wasn't smiling anymore. "You got a real attitude, sweetheart," he muttered. Then, quick as a whip, his hand shot forward again. But Christina was quicker. Her palm cracked across his face. The slap echoed like a gunshot. The cafe froze. Old Jim lowered his paper. The couple by the window gaped. Even the coffee machine seemed too damn loud. The biker's head had snapped to the side. For a long second he didn't move. Just stood there, breathing slow, deliberate. Then his jaw tightened. He turned back toward her. His eyes dead now. No more play. "You little... Get the hell out of my cafe," Christina cut him off. Her voice was sharp, steady. Loud enough for everyone to hear. The biker blinked like he hadn't heard her right. His nostrils flared. The red mark on his cheek was already turning darker, burning along with his pride. "You deaf?" Christina snapped. I said, "Get out." The two other bikers who had been chuckling seconds earlier shifted in their seats. The wiry one with the rings looked at his leader, waiting for a signal. The big one just folded his arms, watching. Nobody in the cafe moved. Nobody spoke. Christina wasn't backing down. "You think you can just walk in here and put your hands on me like I'm some waitress at a roadside bar?" She spat. "I don't give a damn who you are or what hole you crawled out of. You're not welcome here." Her hand was still curled into a fist. Her chest rose and fell in deep, angry breaths. The burn from the coffee stung like hell, but she didn't care. She stared the bearded biker down, daring him to try again. The man bared his teeth. His fingers twitched at his sides, itching. Ready. But then, just as fast as his anger had risen, it cooled. He exhaled, rolled his shoulders, and gave a little shrug. Then came the smirk. "Well now," he muttered, that mocking tone still in his voice, but sharper now. "Who are feisty, huh?" He rubbed the spot on his jaw, where she'd slapped him. Thalam churro, where she'd slapped him. Like that. Christina's stomach turned. The biker stepped back, lifting his hands in mock surrender. "A fine, sweetheart. No need to get all worked up." He turned to his men, waving a lazy hand. "Now come on, boys. Looks like we're not wanted." The wiry one snorted and stood, cracking his knuckles. The big one didn't say a word, just gave Christina a long, unreadable look before pushing back his chair. For a moment, it seemed like it was over. Then the bearded biker paused beside the counter. His fingers tapped the wood, still smiling. Only now, the smirk was wider, meaner. "Know what?" he said, turning back toward her. "I think I changed my mind." He pulled out a chair from the nearest table, spun it around, and dropped into it with a lazy, arrogant sprawl. His men followed. The wiry one flopped down, grinning like it was all a game. But it was all a game. The big one sat slowly like a mountain taking root. The leader leaned back, stretching his arms over the chair. All this talk made me thirsty. He locked eyes with Christina. "Bring me a coffee." Christina stood still. Something in her gut screamed not to trust the shift. But when the biker leaned back in his chair like he didn't have a care in the world, she let out a slow breath. Maybe, just maybe, this was him backing down. Maybe this was his way of ending the scene without looking weak in front of his men. She thought about telling him to go to hell. But she also thought about the customers still sitting there, stiff as statues, watching every move. Maybe it was over. So without a word, she turned, grabbed the pot from the burner, and poured a fresh cup. When she returned to the table, his eyes never left her. She set the cup down in front of him. Just as she tilted the pot to pour, his hand shot out. In one fast, deliberate motion, he slapped the cup upward. The hot liquid exploded from the ceramic, splashing straight into Christina's chest. She gasped. She gasped. The heat tore through her uniform, scorching her skin. The burn was instant. White-hot pain radiated across her ribs and stomach, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers curled around the handle of the coffee pot. Her breathing slowed, deeper now, harder. The cafe was dead silent. Someone muttered a curse. A fork clattered onto a plate. A chair scraped, but Christina didn't move. The biker grinned. "Oh, sweetheart," he chuckled, shaking his head. "You look like you needed to wake up." The wiry one cackled, slapping the big guy's arm. The big one just smirked. Christina's skin was on fire, but she didn't let them see it. Instead, she raised her head. Eyes like steel. Laughter echoed across the cafe. "Damn, check her out," one of the bikers hooted, slapping his knee. I didn't even flinch. Maybe she likes it hot. Her breaths came hard and fast. The pain clawed at her chest, but beneath it something fiercer burned. Rage. She yanked off her soaked apron. It hit the floor with a wet slap. Her fingers wrapped around the empty coffee cup, still warm from what it had held. Without hesitation, she launched it straight at him. Ceramic cracked against his chest, coffee splashing across his filthy leather vest. The smirk vanished. The cafe froze again. Old Jim slowly lowered his newspaper. The young couple by the window clung to each other, wide-eyed. Even the coffee machine seemed to fall silent, the whole room holding its breath. The biker looked down at the dark stains spreading across his vest. His fingers flexed. Then his eyes snapped back to Christina. The smirk was gone. The smirk was gone. "You got some guts, don't you?" he said, voice low and venomous. "Thick with something rotten that seeped into your skin and stayed there." He took a step forward, then another. "You really think you can mouth off to me?" His hand slid into his vest. Click. The sound of the folding knife snapping open shattered the silence. Steel glinted under the cafe lights. His two buddies grinned. Their bodies shifted, coiled tight, predators on the verge. Christina's pulse pounded in her ears. The burn throbbed across her chest. Her fists clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms, but she didn't back down. Then he lunged. He lunged. A sharp breath caught in Christina's throat. Cold fear seized her chest, an icy grip. Her body reacted before her mind. Christina's eyes squeezed shut, bracing for the blow. The cafe erupted into chaos. Chairs screeched. Customers scrambled. In a flurry of motion, the woman near the window let out a strangled scream. The old man at the counter cursed under his breath, but the attack never came. Instead, a dull, heavy thud cut through the panic. Christina's eyes flew open. The biker's wrist was caught mid-strike, locked in a grip like forged steel. A hand, unyielding, unmoved, clamped around his forearm like a vice. The blade hovered just inches from her chest, now useless. The biker's entire arm was immobilized. His eyes widened. He tried to jerk free. Nothing. The hand didn't flinch, didn't shift. It simply held. The man standing there wasn't young, but he sure as hell wasn't weak. His face was carved by time, by miles, by trouble. A weathered cowboy hat sat low over his brow, shadowing a jaw like chiseled stone. A faded denim jacket stretched across broad, immovable shoulders. And he stood like a mountain that had never learned how to bow. The biker snarled, rage flaring. He yanked again, harder this time, trying to rip free. Still nothing. It was like trying to pull an oak tree out of the ground. What the hell? Before he could finish, the stranger let go. Not gently. He shoved the biker's arm back with enough force to send him stumbling. The knife slipped from his fingers. The biker barely caught himself before his knees buckled, boots skidding across the cafe floor. For a second, confusion flickered in his eyes. Shock, humiliation, then rage. His lips curled. Nostrils flared. He spat onto the floor, fury radiating from him like heat. Behind him, his men stiffened, knuckles cracked. They shifted their weight, eyes darting between their leader and the stranger. waiting. The bearded biker wiped at the coffee-stained vest, face darkening. His voice came low, thick with venom. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The man didn't blink, didn't waver. Silence stretched just long enough to make them feel it. Then, in that same steady tone, he answered, "A Chuck Norris." A beat of silence, then laughter exploded from the bikers. "Oh no," the leader wheezed between chuckles. "You hear that, boys? We got ourselves a goddamn legend." The wiry one wiped tears from his eyes. "What's next?" he laughed. "You Clint Eastwood gonna walk in and back you up?" The big one rolled his shoulders, cracking his knuckles. Silent, watching. The bearded biker sneered. "Well then, Chuck," he said, stepping forward. "Well, let's see if you live up to the name." He approached slowly, knife glinting in the cafe's low light. "Oh, look at this," he scoffed. "A washed-up cowboy still playing hero." The wiry one chuckled, leaning on a table. "Won't the movies, old man. Ain't no stunt doubles here to take the hits for you." The leader pointed the knife lazily. "You think you're some kind of badass?" His voice dripped with amusement. I don't care how many times you played the tough guy on screen. Out here," he smirked, "out here you pull that shit, you end up carved up like a hog." Laughter again. The big one slammed a fist into his palm. Chuck didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even look at them. Instead, he turned to Christina. Coffee dripped from her uniform. Her skin was flushed raw from the burn. "Does it hurt bad?" he asked quietly. Christina shook her head, though her hands trembled at her sides. Chuck nodded once. "Get some cold water on it." That was all. Simple, steady. Behind him, the laughter died. The smiles vanished. He hadn't even acknowledged them. He might as well have spat in their faces. The bearded biker's jaw clenched. Then, without warning, he lunged. The blade slashed forward, aimed straight for Chuck's ribs, but it never landed. Chuck moved, faster than any man his age had a right to. He pivoted, just enough to let the blade miss him by an inch. Then in a single motion, he snatched the biker's wrist, twisted it hard. Crack! The sound snapped through the cafe. The biker screamed, knife clattering to the floor. Chuck didn't stop. He yanked the man's arm behind his back, slamming him down on the nearest table. Dishes rattled, silverware clattered. The cafe seemed to shake. The biker let out a strangled curse, face twisted in agony. The two others didn't wait. They charged. The wiry one came first, fists swinging wide. Chuck let the first man go, spinning to meet the next attack. Before the punch could land, Chuck's fist shot out, one brutal strike to the gut. The wiry biker folded. Air whooshed out of him as he crashed backward into a chair, but the big one was already moving, the strongest, the heaviest, the meanest of the three. He roared as he barreled forward, arms wide and ready to slam Chuck into the floor. Chuck waited, right until the very last second. Then he spun. His leg shot out in a perfect controlled motion, a spinning kick. His boot collided with the big guy's chest. The impact was like a wrecking ball hitting a brick wall. The biker's eyes bulged. His entire body lifted off the ground. He flew backward, crashing through a table. Wood splintered, plates shattered. And then silence. The big one didn't get up. The wiry one was gasping for air. And the leader was still hunched over the table, his wrist throbbing, his knife lying somewhere at his feet. Chuck took a step forward, slow, deliberate. The bearded man's breathing was ragged. His shoulders tensed as he turned, eyes flashing with something new. Not anger, not pain, fear. The kind of fear a man feels when he realizes he just made the worst mistake of his life. The wiry one managed to stumble to his feet, but he didn't try to attack again. The big one was still down. And Chuck just stood there, waiting. The cafe was so quiet now you could hear the faint buzz of the old neon sign outside. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Then a chair scraped across the floor. A young woman near the door pulled out her phone. A few minutes later, the police arrived. The first cruiser skidded to a stop outside, red and blue lights flashing through the cafe's front windows. A second followed close behind. The wail of sirens faded as two officers stepped out, hands already resting on their holsters. Inside, the tension still lingered, thick as the scent of spilled coffee and sweat. A few customers remained frozen in place, hands gripping tables or coffee cups that had long since gone cold. Someone still had their phone out, recording. The bearded biker stood near the door, his breathing ragged, just breathing ragged. His wrist was sore from Chuck's grip, his pride even more so. The officers entered, eyes sweeping over the wreckage. One of them, a graying man with a sheriff's badge, narrowed his gaze at the three bikers. "I'm guessing you boys are the reason we got a dozen calls about a disturbance." The bearded man gritted his teeth but didn't speak. The younger officer, a stocky guy with a buzz cut, stepped forward, nodding toward Christina. "Oh, ma'am, you all right?" Christina swallowed, then nodded once. "I'm fine." The sheriff's eyes shifted to Chuck. He didn't need an introduction. He recognized the legend standing in front of him. "Something tells me you handled things before we even got here," the sheriff muttered, glancing at the overturned chairs, the shattered table, and the three bruised bikers who were doing their best not to make eye contact. Chuck didn't answer. He didn't have to. The sheriff sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw before turning to his deputy. "Cuff him." The younger cop moved in, pulling out the cuffs. "Hands behind your backs. Let's go." The wiry biker muttered something under his breath, but didn't resist. The big one winced as he was yanked to his feet, ribs still sore from Chuck's boot. But the leader was different. Even as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his eyes never left Chuck. Burning hatred simmered in them. The veins in his neck bulged as he took a step closer, boots dragging against the floor. He looked like a man who wasn't used to losing. And right now, he had lost everything. Just before the officers pushed him toward the door, he leaned in, lowering his voice so only Chuck could hear. "This ain't over," he snarled. "You hear me, old man? This ain't over." Chuck didn't blink, didn't react. He just stared, and in that stare, the bikers saw something that made his stomach twist. Something cold, something final. It was the look of a man who had already decided how this was going to end. The biker swallowed hard, and for the first time since he walked into that cafe, he wasn't so sure anymore. The sheriff cleared his throat. "All right, let's move." The officers hauled them outside, pushing them toward the cruisers. The door swung shut behind them. The flashing lights faded into the distance. Inside the cafe, silence remained. Then, a breath. A slow, shaky exhale. Christina stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge. The adrenaline that had kept her upright was finally wearing off. She looked at Chuck, really looked at him. He was calm, steady, like none of this had shaken him in the slightest. She swallowed. "Thank you." Chuck just nodded. No words, no speech, just a simple nod. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a bill, and dropped it into the tip jar. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a thing. As he stepped outside, the warm morning air met him. The sun had climbed a little higher. The town, the world, kept moving like nothing had happened. Inside the cafe, life would go on. Coffee would be poured. Eggs would sizzle on the griddle. Conversations would pick up where they left off. But no one in that cafe would ever forget today. They wouldn't forget the bikers. They wouldn't forget the fight. And they sure as hell wouldn't forget the morning Chuck Norris taught a lesson that wouldn't be unlearned. All right, folks, that was one hell of a ride, wasn't it? Now, before we wrap up, let's be clear. This story isn't real. Chuck Norris didn't actually walk into a small-town cafe and teach a gang of bikers the lesson of a lifetime. But damn, wouldn't that be something? That said, even though this tale is pure fiction, there's something real in it. At its core, this isn't just about one man versus a group of troublemakers. It's about standing up for what's right, protecting the innocent, knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Christina, despite being outnumbered and in danger, didn't let fear control her. Chuck. He didn't start the fight, but he sure as hell ended it. This story reminds us that true strength isn't about throwing punches. It's about presence. Chuck didn't need to brag, didn't need to prove himself. His actions spoke for him. And in the end, that's what made those bikers realize they were way out of their league. And let's talk about justice. Police showed up. The bad guys were taken in. Life moved on. But what happened in that cafe won't be forgotten. It's a reminder that bullies can be put in their place, that courage matters, and that sometimes the right person at the right moment can change everything. So what do you think? What's your biggest takeaway from this story? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And hey, if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more stories just like this. See you in the next one.